once again, shall I use a baseball reference here, knocked it out of the park with his column early in the week. Tony Messenger, STLtoday.com, contributor to the Big 550 KTRS. Good morning. Tony Messenger?
Are you there?
I'm here.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Can you hear me now?
Well, we can hear you now. All right, Tony Messenger. It looks like Mike Shannon and the St. Louis Cardinals, believe it or not, employer-employee are having a bit of a situation, and your column sort of laid it out. It was interesting how the Cardinals are going to the city and asking for some subsidies for Ballpark Village, and yet sort of kind of hamstringing Mike Shannon's hands as he tries to sell his building.
Yeah, you know, the couple interesting things about this dispute. Obviously, I don't think it's a dispute that either Mike Shannon nor the Cardinals want. When a guy like Shannon is in your Hall of Fame, the St. Louis Cardinals Hall of Fame, is a beloved former player and 45-year broadcaster, it just doesn't look good for the organization to be fighting with him. And the dispute is interesting in the context of the Cardinals asking for subsidies for Ballpark Village, because a lot of people believe that those subsidies are being used to compete with other private businesses in the area, specifically bars and restaurants, that are not being subsidized by taxpayers. And so it has created this uneven playing field. And a lot of people, although Mike Shannon didn't complain about this, would suggest that Shannon's was one of the restaurants and bars that went out of business because of Ballpark Village taking business from area restaurants and bars. So Shannon is trying to sell his building, but his building has a height restriction written into the deed related to not Ballpark Village, but the original Busch Stadium that was there before, going back, the Cardinals say, about 50 years. And what he's asking for is, look, take the deed restriction off so that I can compete in the free market, so that I can sell my building. And what the Cardinals have been saying is, well, we want to control to some degree. They don't use that word, but they want some sort of right of first refusal to determine what goes in that building so that it doesn't compete with their taxpayer-subsidized development. And so the two have been at odds. I can tell you that they're negotiating. I know that since my column ran, both sides have had conversations because they would like this dispute to go away.
Tony, one of the things you brought up and one of the points of differential is that restriction was for the old Busch Stadium, and who put it on, who agreed to it, and if it was for the old Busch Stadium, is it still in effect now that old Busch Stadium no longer exists?
It's complicated, but this is one of the reasons why the Shannons believe it's so appropriate for it to come off. All of the land in that area was at one point owned and controlled by the city, the LCRA, where they basically took this whole swath of area to use it for downtown redevelopment, including the Busch Stadium. And so there were restrictions in there placed on building related to Busch, specifically Busch Stadium. But that stadium no longer exists. But all of those deed restrictions have passed on to new owners of property in the area. So the Cardinals own a piece of land that has that gives them some control over the deed restriction. Cordish Companies, that the developer of Ballpark Village, owns a piece of the land that still has gives them control of that deed restriction. But it's all related not to the current Cardinal Stadium, but a previous Busch Stadium. And so the argument from Mike Shannon's folks is this thing shouldn't even exist anymore anyway. The argument from some folks that I received in emails and tweets after the piece was published is, look, when you buy a piece of property and it's got a deed restriction, you bought it with your eyes open, you know it's there. And I think that's a fair argument. However, when the landscape is changing, i.e. the people who have that deed restriction are now asking for help from the government, for help from the taxpayers, and part of that help is going into businesses that are competing with what you want to do with your piece of property, I think that changes the landscape.
Right,
and I think that's a fair argument.
But the land restriction wasn't like the Cardinals sold the land to somebody with the deed restrictions. It was the city putting these deed restrictions on it. So
it was the city putting the deed restriction on relating to the building of a previous stadium that no longer exists.
Right, yeah, so it's really convoluted. Also, Bob O'Loughlin gets in on this, too. Now, KTRS has conflicts of interest all over the place. We're part owned by the Cardinals. Bob O'Loughlin has a part ownership of the Big 550 KTRS. He owns the building. He owns the Hilton right next door. That at some point they were going to put a Ferris wheel or wanted to. He sort of nixed that. Is the idea that someone's going to buy it and build a taller building and sort of overshadow or take views away from the other competing views in the area?
What Bill DeWitt III tells me is that the concern isn't competition. The concern is building something that just takes away from the character of the Ballpark Village investment. So, for instance, there was a proposal for the Ferris wheel. The Cardinals didn't have a problem with the Ferris wheel. Bob O'Loughlin had a problem with the Ferris wheel because he plans on building something similar at Union Station. And that's why I brought that in, because Bob O'Loughlin is being subsidized at Union Station and is also part of the soccer group that is now seeking tax subsidy to build a soccer stadium. And I brought that in because it just raises this question. You have all of these business people asking the taxpayers to help them with their investments, and one can make the argument that those investments are good for the city. However, you have all of these folks that are asking for help from the taxpayers, standing in the way of a guy who's not asking for help from the taxpayers. He just wants to be able to sell his building, and I don't think that looks good.
Yeah, it's it's a doozy, all right, because these are people who are normally not fighting with each other in public, but
this is one of those things where I think if the people involved in the dispute had set themselves aside and said, how is this going to look if it's on the front page of the newspaper?
Right.
Boy, we need to fix this thing. It's just one of those things that the Cardinals' name and the value of Mike Shannon's name and those reputations in the community are such that I can't believe there's not a way for them to handle this and take care of it and make everybody happy.
Is there somebody who wants to buy the land but has told Mike Shannon and his people, I won't buy it with this deed restriction on it?
I don't know that for sure. I can tell you that Mike Shannon's attorney tells me that they believe that deed restriction makes it very difficult for them to market the property.
Mm-hmm. Plot thickens. Tony Messenger, we read you, stltoday.com. You're with us every Tuesday and Thursday. Have a good weekend. Good job,
Good
Tony.
to talk to you.
All right.
Bye.
Good stuff. Interesting.
Yes.
That's a bailiwick right there.
A bailiwick.
That is a bailiwick. A bailiwick, it's
Bailiwick.
It's a sticky wicket, if you will. Right? It's a sticky,
Bailiwick?
It's a bailiwick. It's a bailey. It's a bail, and you got some wickets coming out of it, so it's prickly. Anywhere you turn, you're going to get stung. You're going to get pricked.
I don't think I've heard that term before.
Well, it's old school. 8:27.